So
it's incredible.
Yeah, this is actually waves that come from the boats.
Yeah, that's maybe
underneath icebergs. This is melting under the surface.
Do you think we could try to record like ambience of this?
Yes.
Echo?
Yes.
Yeah, it would be interesting to hear it in the water.
Yeah, when it's windy, the sound is all over the lagoon.
Yeah.
Can sound inspire us to think differently? We'll take you to places you'd probably never go. Remote, unfamiliar, not very appealing places, yet ones that are exciting and reveal much about the future challenges posed to our society. Ones that are rich in sound. Future Landscapes, a podcast on the challenges of humankind as heard in sound. In the previous episode, we listened to an oil well in Jaroshice, Czech Republic, whose imminent end also marks the end of the oil age. The effects of its unwanted byproduct, CO2, will change the world in much the same way as mass oil production once did. With our sound expedition, we're now on our way to a place where the consequences of burning fossil fuels are very tangible and irreversible. They're creating a new world. No ice, just land. Episode 7. Fjallsárlón Glacier Lagoon, Iceland. Icelanders like to call their island the land of fire and ice, paying homage to the glaciers and volcanoes that have shaped its otherworldly landscape. The glaciers made their mark on it around 1,000 to 1,500 years ago. Today, they cover a tenth of the island's territory, where life has been harsh for humans for most of history due to the subarctic climate and frozen ground. We're driving our van through the uninhabited and dramatic landscape to Fjallsárlón, one of the lagoons created by the melting of Iceland's largest glacier, Vatnajökull. We've made the long journey from the capital not to take in the beauty of this natural scenery, but to peer into a laboratory of future problems. When we step out of the car, the masses of ice in front of us look very different from the historic photographs of giant and majestic glaciers taken by Iceland's first professional glaciologists in the 1950s. And because glaciers are a part of the local ecosystems, their melting is slowly changing the way the environment, nature, and people will coexist in the future.
Facing a glacier is the perspective of looking at it as a landscape architect. Of course, this glacial activity is in fact a very dramatic and catastrophic event because we are looking at a melting glacier because of the ongoing climate crisis. And so beyond thinking about the glacial activity just as a landscaping activity, we can think about ice also in another way, as a sort of archival medium. Not just a transformation medium, a medium that somehow changes the present condition towards its future state, but also a kind of medium that gives us traces of the past. Traces of the past in that way that we are capable of actually learning a lot about the history of the atmosphere of our planet from the ice cores and samples from the glaciers. since these samples give us a glimpse into how the atmosphere looked, for example, 10 or maybe more thousand years ago, because these glaciers are so old that actually there are bubbles of the ancient air trapped deep in the glacier.
Sorry for interrupting, but we can hear the bubbles like here.
When the bubbles are on the way up, they give also sound. So
Yeah.
Carrying several boxes of recording equipment, we're now slowly descending down a small hill to reach the edge of the glacial lagoon. Field recordist Magnús Bergsson knows this place very well. He's visited it many times in the past and has spent long hours here, sometimes even days, quietly recording what one cannot hear during a brief visit. After receiving his first cassette recorder as a gift from his parents as a teenager, he has dedicated his life to recording natural landscapes all over Iceland using sophisticated sound instruments. Over the decades, his archive has become an archaeological sound library that provides compelling evidence of how the environment has been continually changing.
Sound can be a medium of not just representing but also prolonging the evidentiary activity of the nature itself, because glacier in this way is another manifestation of nature representing itself, representing the dynamics of the geophysics and the geochemistry and the geobiology.
So it carries in a way the whole DNA of the history of the planet?
Not the wall, and not DNA in a literal sense, but metaphorically speaking, DNA can be a nice way how to put it. Yeah. Also, glaciers are places that give us, or train us in a specific kind of geological imagination, in a what I call this way of seeing or even way of hearing. This geological imagination is the one that actually allows us to make or to place and make concrete an activity that is very abstract at first.
Right.
That is far beyond our usual scale of cognition and experience, and yet there are locations, such as this location, that actually is a training place for the imagination of the planetary.
All of Iceland's glaciers are melting, and their lagoons attract tourists from all over the world. After the financial crisis of 2008, which also hit the Icelandic economy, the local government has made many efforts to market the island as a tourist destination, attractive for its natural beauty. And it has succeeded. The number of tourists visiting the island each year has since increased from 500,000 to 2.5 million. They all fly here by plane, which of course results in the production of large amounts of CO2, which causes the warming of the atmosphere and melting of the glaciers. One of the very popular tourist attractions here on the lagoon are motorboat tours to the glacier wall, where tourists can even touch the floating icebergs that have broken off from the melting glacier. Advertisements for these tours promise a connection with Icelandic nature and urge the visitors to make most of their time before this natural phenomenon disappears.
This is exactly what we can call an aestheticization of a political event. It actually neutralizes any mobilization potential of the event of the melting glacier by turning it into an object of the contemplation of something beautiful, or making it beautiful at all. Even talking about it as something beautiful is the way how actually we use a language that extracts the event from continuum of the causal chain that links our activity to the melting of the glacier. And we become just disinterested observers. It must be a very alienating experience in the end. Like alienation from actually our own making, because this is of our own making.
Right.
This the condition of the glacier at the moment.
The average round trip from continental Europe to Iceland means almost 1 ton of CO2 per person. As the local tourism industry grows, so does its carbon footprint, which already accounts for a third of Iceland's CO2 emissions, as does the local heavy industry focused on aluminum and ferrosilicon production. However, thanks to rapidly shrinking glaciers, half of which have disappeared in the last 25 years, it is here that the effects of climate change are very tangible. In 2019, the country held a symbolic funeral for Vatnajökull, its first glacier lost to climate change. And scientists fear that all 400 of Iceland's glaciers will disappear within 100 years. The Vatnajökull glacier that we are standing in front of now has lost almost 200 cubic kilometers of ice since 1989, and its area has shrunk by more than 400 square kilometers.
I think that it is important to understand that the temporality of the glacier is very different from the temporality of the human life. And as these two actually align with each other by actually collapsing the geological time into the human time that is happening through the melting of the glacier, to the acceleration of the melting of the glacier. And we can, or why it is critical and why it is important to actually reverse it and perhaps actually adapt our sensibility to those tempos and temporalities, rhythms and scales that actually exceed ordinary perspective of the human life.
The ice kept old air, and it's always something fresh around the glaciers and the glacial lagoons. Maybe because we are having so fresh air from the
past.
From the past.
Yeah.
It's a smell from the past.
The disappearance of glaciers is expected to have far-reaching consequences, not only for local nature, but also for the economy. Glacial rivers are an important source of fresh water and also play a key role in producing significant amounts of local renewable energy. Without the glaciers that feed the rivers, Iceland's energy sector will be severely affected, but so will other important sectors especially fishing and tourism. Among the less anticipated impacts, perhaps, is how this change may affect the island's geology. As glaciers melt, the pressure that they had exerted on the Earth's surface is released, and the distribution of forces on rocks in the Earth's crust and upper mantle changes. This can lead to more molten rock, or magma, forming in the mantle, which may subsequently lead to increased volcanic activity. And the list of problems doesn't end here, as the ice loss contributes to climate change in a vicious loop of warming. In a process known as albedo feedback, the heat-reflective bright ice is replaced by absorbent darker surfaces. So, as the ice mass shrinks, this changes how much of the sunlight that hits the Earth's surface is reflected back into space. At the same time, the exposed soil becomes subject to erosion, which means that the organic matter stored in the soil decomposes and carbon dioxide is released into the atmosphere. Standing on the edge of the lagoon, through Magnús's mics, we can not only pick up the crackles produced when bubbles are released from nearby chunks of ice, but once in a while, it's also possible to hear huge ice blocks breaking off from the ice mass.
There is also a nice function of the sound as the device to link between scales.
Yeah.
In that way that we hear micro sound
Yeah.
that is related to macro, even like a planetary event. And that brings me to this idea of sound as something like a scale trespasser that freely moves between scales that are very strictly delimited by the visual experience.
From the bottom.
It sounds like a hall.
Yeah.
Big,
So we're
huge
getting back
hall.
to the chamber again.
Yes.
That's funny how you bring these notions related to interior, with chamber, room, etc., eco. Reminds me of the way how some philosophers describe the global situation as a situation of being actually locked in a gigantic inside, something like a hothouse of modernity.
Yes.
Okay.
As the melting of the glaciers is inevitable and irreversible, Iceland is taking steps to adapt to the change. It is building new capacities for the operation of wind turbines to cover the expected decrease in the energy production of hydroelectric plants. The country is also investing huge amounts of money into zero-carbon transport and afforestation projects to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Planting new forests seems like an effective way of recultivating and restoring eroded and degraded land. Finally, significant efforts are also being devoted to capturing and storing atmospheric carbon dioxide. Iceland is developing a technology for pressuring this gas into the geological bedrock, where it slowly turns into stone. Carbon storage could also become a significant part of the local economy. The melting of glaciers also means that the country is gaining land, which raises questions of land ownership, use, or conservation and resource management. The debate is evolving towards the view that no new land should be sold as private property. Instead, the soil that forms beneath these glaciers should remain a so-called common resource, used for reforestation and thus carbon sequestration. Such an approach to land ownership would be revolutionary, because it sees it as a resource that should be universally available and regulated to prevent overexploitation, so that all can continue to benefit from it as well. Thus, private ownership is not seen as the highest value when considering a future without glaciers.
This is one of the great experiences of witnessing a personality in nature. A personality that has many faces, but still there is something like I feel some kind of spirit inside that.
No,
not in the sense
totally.
of a ghost of any holy kind, not any kind of god, but just something like an internal consistency of like all these different places that we can visit, and that internal consistency is what I would call the personality, something like a character that can play, that can act, that has an agency.
You've just heard the 7th episode of Future Landscapes, a podcast on the challenges of humankind based on a sonic expedition into the ambivalent technologies and ecosystems of the Czech Republic and Iceland. You can find much more at futurelandscapes.cz and subscribe on your favorite podcast hosting platforms. Next time, we'll finish our sonic expedition in a very special place. Stay tuned.